1 year later, or almost 1 year later, I thought it'd be a little cheesy to record literally the day of or day after 2 years in a row, given that this conflict has lasted 2 years now, or into its second year, I should say. The Israel and Hamas, or Gaza war, as it is likely known to everybody here. We're going to talk about it. I think more specifically, we're going to talk about the ramifications that it has here at home in the U.S. for all the listeners that might be outside of this country. I want your takes as well. It's fascinating to me that this conflict, again, has gone on for a year. I want to talk about it. I want to talk a little bit about the history as we did a year ago and talk about what's happened. Do we still support this country? Should we still support this country in its efforts? All that and more. I'm Sal Sante with the Patriots. Let's get right into it. Thank you, first of all, for tuning in on this one. This one's pretty special to me, and I'm sure special to a lot of you out there. It's something, the Middle Eastern conflict is something that we Americans grew up with, at least for my generation, our entire lives. We were in and out of Afghanistan, all over the Middle East, stamping our foot. You could see military bases in almost every nation that's out of there, some degree or another. And of course, you have Israel and this conflict that has, interestingly occurred as soon as we got pulled all of our troops from Afghanistan, or had that debacle, I should say. Within a couple of years, we have this conflict. And what this conflict has become, as we'll talk about in a little bit, has become, in my opinion, a regional war. You have Israel going against multiple collaborators in what seems like a proxy war of Israel versus Iran. And it's unfortunate, but this is exactly what I think that I and many people who looked at the history of Israel and the Middle East, I think many of us were afraid that the retaliation to the initial act might be, what's the best way to put this, without being overbearing, hoping that my biggest hope was that Israel's retribution would be in kind, would be enough to belittle any future attempts at making an effort like that to kill many thousands of Israelis. And instead, what we've seen is, if you're to believe the numbers that come out, you can or cannot. I don't really need that for what's coming to me information-wise to make my decision, but we'll get to that further along. Like I said, it's unfortunate what this has happened. So let's go over a little bit of the history. I know we did so about a year ago, but let's refresh the memory here. If you're going to look at the Middle East, or you're going to look at Israel, and you're going to look at the entire history, what you honestly have to do is you have to go back into the Bible. And you have to go into my goodness, I suck at so excuse me. Whether you want to look at this at the historical context, you're going to have to look at things like the Bible, things like the Torah, which is, of course, included in the Bible. And you have Quran from Islam. You're going to see that the concept of Israel has been around, and the conflict of the Middle East has been around for quite literally millennia. And if you're going to go out, try to sort out every single misstep and say who's more in the right or more in the wrong, I don't think that you'll be able to come up with a finite answer. I don't think there's an exact answer to the Middle Eastern problem, and it is a problem. And I think it's unfortunate to look at it that way, but that's what it is. And when you try to get to the back of it, right, as we try to do, the Bible is where you start if you want to start making, tally marks. But the recent history where it starts is actually and I think we talked about it last year. Again, I'll link that video in the description because I believe I went into a lot better detail than I will here, but I'm trying to outline. And what you started with was a mass migration into what was Palestine. Okay, the area that was denoted Palestine, this area that was called Palestine by the Romans, and from there on lives this area that does not have a sovereign government, does have relationships and committees, and certain members, executive members, but realistically speaking, there is no government of Palestine. There is no state of Palestine, at least not today. And there actually wasn't look back to the 1900s, maybe even into the 1800s, there was no state. And what you're looking at is just an area that was called Palestine, right? Again, not governed by really anybody. And this area got taken over by many people trying to come in. You're talking about, again, the Romans, then you go to the French, the British, and eventually what it ended up with was many states holding on to different parts of this area that would be called Palestine, and it was to be divided, essentially. And after World War I, that was kind of forced. You had the Balfour Declaration that mandated a certain amount of, not Israelis, I'm sorry, not there yet. The amount of Jews or Zionists, as they are called, were going to come into the area, X number, basically making their claim to the land. They are partitioned this land. And over time, using their pull in the British government, as well as in the United States, which would become a major player later in the formation of Israel as a state, the Zionists and the Jewish people, especially after World War II, were pushing hard for a state. They had gotten enough numbers where, at least in certain areas, they can make a claim that they should own the land because they have so many people living on it. And with this decision after World War II, pretty much had the world's eye, right? And kind of that Olay, if you will. If you're not familiar with the term, it's basically allowing it to happen. And the world essentially said, yeah, this is yours, and have at it. And Israelis took their opportunity right after World War II. You're talking about the time in between 1945 and 1948, before the establishment of the state, and the Nakba, as they call it, which is the disaster. And that's the formation of Israel. So in between that time, you had major acts of terrorism on both sides, to be fair, but mainly coming from and orchestrated by Zionists. And it got to the point where not only were people getting essentially bought out of their homes at rates that were absurdly low for a reason, whether it be violence, arson, and just complete terrorism, to be completely frank with you. I'm not saying that Israel invented or Zionists invented terrorism, because they were the culprits of terrorism for years. Talking about going back into Europe and in certain parts of the Middle East, they definitely were terrorized. And I'm not taking that away from them, but the way that they were able to turn it into a really propagandistic movement and get the media on their side, talking about the Zionists, they were the start of that. They were the start of taking the eye and the heart of the millions and the masses aren't living in your situation, trying to get that. That was all on the Zionist side. That's not to say that they're not fantastic at it nowadays and putting misinformation all over our political spectrum. They absolutely are. The Zionists and what they do for Israel, absolutely. You get a lot more information from the other side too. And in the end, I think if you're really paying attention and you're not trying to be partisan, you start to see. So as you start out, and this is where I get a little bit foggy, because Israel has essentially been at war since its inception and its birth as a state. But they essentially, as soon as they became a state, they were attacking multiple enemies. Now, some of them were planning to attack for sure, or had plans to, were waiting to execute, and Israel got the jump. That's also what you're going to hear from Israel. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. They fought, I believe, 6 at least sovereign enemies. They come out on top there. They take what they essentially see as theirs. It keeps going on. And essentially the battle between the Palestinians and Israel has not stopped. Once it became, I believe, 2007, just want to go and check on that. I was right on that. So ever since 2007, you had the rise of Hamas, of course, leading up to that. And what Hamas was doing was taking over parts of the Gaza Strip, which is a very, very common term you're throwing there. What it is the strip on the west end of, if you're looking at Israel as a state, west side, believe the state is right up against the sea. Yeah. So yes, so it is right along here. You are right on, looks like yeah, I feel like I'm much smarter than I think I am. I just didn't know. Okay. So you're bordering right on the Mediterranean Sea. It's very, very, let's just say, strategically advantageous land if you're looking at it from a geopolitical perspective. And Israel, since 2007, like I said, the rise of Hamas have basically blockaded them, have had a military blockade and military presence in the Gaza Strip since that time. It's been a constant conflict. There's been, what you'll hear from the Western media talking about Israel is that the Palestinians are constantly lobbing rockets. That's why we have the Iron Dome system, right? The thing that shoots down rockets. Mind you, they have many, many more things in defense there. Of course, they have the wall as well. And Israel is in this conflict since 2007, talking about Hamas, using it as a talking point. And, you could say rightfully so or not. That is not my place to judge. But the amount of time that it has taken for this conflict to really spill out. And I think this is where we get into the problem here. What it's become now. I mentioned the terrorism that was being perpetrated under almost the guise and almost the Olay defense, as I like to say. The allowing to happen by Western nations, the EU, NATO, all of this. As the tides kind of shifted and Israel became the lockstep, the one nation that became a constant producer in the area, which is the Middle East, the narrative starts to flip, and you start to see, especially in American media, a lot of, as long as you're on the left, I should say, you're going to see a lot of sympathetic Palestinian media. And I hope you don't take that as a negative, or don't hear that coming from me as a negative, because I think it's very important to hear their side and hear every point of view on this whole conflict. Of course, everybody's going to be biased. How this conflict started, the one that we're talking about today, is with the exact opposite of how Israel was founded. And when you're looking at what a terrorist attack is, to me, there's a difference between a terrorist attack and an act of war. And I do think this is where, if you're looking at it, you're not going to call it the Palestinians. You're going to say, I apologize. You're not going to say Palestinians, but you are going to say Hamas. So what Hamas did, and of course you got to remember that Hamas is under the guise of Iran. Iran has a massive presence in the Middle East, many proxies. Although there are sovereign nations, there are movements and groups, talking about people like the Houthis or another group like Hezbollah up in Lebanon. You have multiple different groups that are put together, and of course Hamas being another one, that are basically set in stone, and their place is to be anti-Israel. No matter how you face it, how you look at it, their language, their actions, it's all anti-Israel. Really is, unfortunately, that is the truth. And with that in mind, how Israel goes about that and how they utilize it, right? If they're just keep taking land, of course they're going to look terrible, but using them as a constant punching bag in the media. And this is what this event became, unfortunately. October 7th of 2023 is going to be remembered for, I think, forever. I think it's going to be one of the marking points. And I don't say that as a good thing. I say that as a terrible thing. It's going to mark what I think to be possibly the start of a global war. And I don't say that lightly again. And we're going to talk about why. All right. So what happened last year? You had over 1,100 Israelis killed. You had people who were taken hostage, people who were allegedly raped, people who were allegedly underage people, children getting raped, killed. And of course, a lot of this stuff is alleged, but just the death toll in of itself, over 1,100 dead, included American civilians, or American citizens, I should say, that are, some of them, I believe, taken hostage. And I don't say I believe, I know that there was a few. So with that in mind, the act that was taken borders on an act of war. Now, the only problem is something like Hamas, who is not a sovereign nation, can't declare war. They're just a paramilitary group. Although they do have leadership, again, that goes to summits somehow I don't understand, but they're not a nation. So they can't declare war. They can only commit really terrorist attacks. But the problem is what came next. And Israel immediately declared, I remember the day like it was yesterday, seeing it on Twitter. I knew it was going to happen, and just how bad it was going to be, I didn't know. Immediately you had deaths rolling in. And at first you had a lot of media coming out where you had hits coming on civilian areas, talking about hospitals, talking about schools. Some of them verified to be from Israel, some of them verified to be from Hamas themselves, some of them verified to be from Houthis, actually, and others not confirmed. And this was going on for, I would say, the first 3-4 months, and it was dragging on and on and on. And to me, it looked like a failed mission. Now, part of the problem here is that although you're getting all this aid from America, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, what Israel was doing in the beginning of this war was almost old school in a way, trying to go, I would say, door to door. And I'm not trying to get into their exact tactics. I'm just saying from a bird's eye view here what they did. They swept the streets and they got dirty with it, which is, talking about a modern era, you're talking about the number one way to turn people off of your bandwagon. People do not support that. They don't want to support you going through ruining people's daily lives just to continue this nonstop battle, right? And what they've done recently is militarily extremely intelligent, and politically, I would say, very intelligent. For world affairs, I think is very negative. And here's my problem with it. So what they started doing is, of course, attacking the leaders of the movement, which is where, of course, you should be going in the first place. Now, they did, allegedly, they're in tunnels. They needed their intelligence to catch up is what Israel needed, I believe. And what you started seeing was very targeted attacks. And now, these attacks definitely had their backfires as well. I don't want you to misinterpret that at all. I'm just saying much more targeted than sweeping the street and hoping that you come across one in their living room and right? That's where they were at in the beginning of this, at least it seems. Yeah. You have attacks like recently taking down the leader. I believe military command leader was taken out in June. Then you had this whole role this past couple of weeks. You had Hezbollah commander taken out, someone who was next in line allegedly. You actually had let's see if I can pronounce this one right. Yahya Sinwar. He was taken out just this week, and he was the leader of Hamas. So that's where I believe they should have started. You had an attack, I believe, 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, where Israel targeted the pagers and I think it was pagers and walkie-talkies. Now, was there some backfire? 100%, and it would be, I think, deemed a terrorist act by any other nation. But the problem is, how can you commit a terrorist act when you're already in war? When there wasn't proof of, and I'm not sure if there ever will be, but proof of actually targeting the civilians. If they had the connect, if they somehow got their way in and were the ones selling these beepers and walkie-talkies direct on, I just don't know how, you could be that stupid as an organization and just trust someone who may be in Israeli contact. That's unbelievable. How you don't have people that use this. But beside the point, you have these attacks that, in my opinion, actually are the modern war, or how you're going to conduct war if you're actually going to. And if this was this from the beginning, well, I'd say it's a much more advantageous use of the funds coming in. Now, what it's become now and recently is, of course, within this past 6 months, I want to say, Israel's branched out in their attacks. Now, they've also been getting attacked, so I don't want to just leave it all one-sided, but they've levied attacks of war now. Now they're heading into Lebanon. Now, this is part where, as an American, I'm a little bit confused as to how Lebanon doesn't claim these militants as their military wing. They have nothing to do. Okay, so then why are you allowing them to use your land? to base military operations. It just seems a little bit, well, call me naive, but that's a little stupid. I think you're just asking for trouble, if you ask me. To me, it sounds like they don't want to solve the problem, and I'm sure that's actually the case. Now, you have something like this. They're attacking now into Lebanon, and they're attacking over to the Houthis as well. Now, with them attacking the Houthis, that's based out of Yemen. So you have, I mean, you're talking about attacks on one, you could say three sides. Basically, I think you can make the argument of all sides if you're going to include Iran and where the backing for all these groups is coming from. And so trying to put yourself in the middle of this and trying to get your way out of it. You got to remember, if you're looking back at 1948 or even before it as the creation, none of those people set up this movement have anything to do with Israel or the state of Palestine or the Middle East today. None of those people are alive today. We're dealing with a whole different crop of people. These people, I should say, are just living in the world that they were given, trying to make the best of it. How do you make the best of that situation? To me, it sounds impossible. Now, my biggest issue as an American is if you're going to pick a side, all right? And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I honestly don't believe one side is better than the other, to tell you the damn truth. I think that the argument that they use that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East is horseshit. And I believe that, sorry, but I believe that most of those countries in the Middle East that are committed to aiding these groups and continuously attacking Israel as well are no better. I believe that nobody is in the right in this situation. No one's willing to admit that they're in the wrong in this situation. This is why the situation is going to keep going away. It is. The only reason that it's so expensive nowadays is because we've allowed war. We've allowed everything in life, food, shelter, to be extremely expensive. And if that's going to be the case, the cost of war is going to skyrocket. That's really what we're seeing. The aid coming out of the U.S. And let's talk about this. I'm off the timeline now. We're caught up to today. A bunch of leaders are killed. And Israel is really doing a targeted effort, it seems, to topple its theological enemies in the region, let's say. So if we're at that point of agreement, if we could see where this war's come from, I can't stress enough, I think you should go back, listen to last year's episode on really the history of Israel. If I didn't do a good enough job, you could let me know it and I will do a full project on it, because this type of thing, like, I don't like to just read off notes here for you guys. I like to just, it's one of those things that if I don't read an entire, essentially, book's worth of information right before I come on here, I won't be able to do it. So just being able to free talk with you guys and kind of, again, talk about it from that American perspective and what we should be caring about. To me, getting back to the point, what Israel's been doing since this war has started, since October 7th, it's more targeted efforts over the last couple of months, what it seems like now. You may not like that they're heading off the leadership, but that is how you're going to win. That's how you're going to win the war, actually, not just the battle. That's how you're going to win the war. You're just going to keep losing battles if the people can go underground, go in hiding, get sourced out from other countries, and get other nations in attack, other groups. So, decapitating leadership, making sure that nobody can really run these groups of hooligans who are out there terrorizing your country that exists as Israel, all in support of that. The utilization of American aid is confusing to me. Again, you're going to pick a side. I'm not going to say either one is great, but if you're going to pick a side, it would only make sense to me as an American to aid the side of the battle you would see not only as advantageous to you, does it see benefit to you in the future currently, but I believe it would be advantageous to you as a nation to trade with that person or help that person in the attempts to win the war. Now, the attempts that I've seen using foreign aid, as I was doing just a little bit of research for this show here, it was frustrating to me because I start seeing where money is going, and I just tried to take a bird's eye view. Again, I didn't try to dive too far into it, but seeing the money that's been allocated for these different places is astounding to me. So if you're going to look at who is funding everything, it's essentially the United States. Other countries, in terms of foreign aid, are somewhere adding up into the small billions. Now, if we're going to look at funding from the United States, you're talking about hundreds of billions, if not trillions, over the course of a year. All right. So Germany and the European Commission together, they are both contributing about two billion a year. So I was wrong on that. We're contributing over 10. I think that's something to be said. The rest of the nations are well under $1 billion. Gaza's received over $4 billion in aid over the past decade or so. The United States is going to provide, now this is the one that really tripped me up. The United States is going to provide $404 million in humanitarian aid to support Palestinian civilians in Gaza, the West Bank, and the region, bringing U.S. total assistance to more than $674 million over the past 8 months. Okay, now this is published in June 2012. So that's basically the scope of the war in the past 8 months, what they're talking about there. Now, all you have to do is look at the aid that's going out to Israel, which is now, unfortunately, not really a finite number. We're donating not only aid in terms of money, which has skyrocketed, but also military aid, which is coming costs in the hundreds of billions of dollars. With that being said, you look at Israel, $3 billion just, this is 2023. This is before we actually committed to this war. Unbelievable. Okay. So, trying to reread what I read before and wondering why I couldn't find out the total. That's why. So, on average, we're somewhere about $3.3 billion in aid every year to Israel. What it's become now, we actually supported Ukraine 5 times more or more, somewhere around the nature of 16, 17, 18 billion dollars last year. That's last year. This year, they both got about that amount. Now, a lot of what happened with Israel was military aid directly, talking about weapons, planes, gadgets, everything you could think of. And this is where, in my opinion, I think we have giving out our military equipment to be used unless it is way old, unless it is no longer functional to our army, to me is unacceptable. Unless we have boots on the ground, unless we are taking care of business ourselves, we have no business giving out any of our military intelligence. That's just as American. Number one. Number two, the aid to Israel is one thing. To aid the other side, and you can call it humanitarian aid, let's look at it from Israel's perspective. They're receiving funds. A lot of that's going to get turned into war funds. Whether you're talking about rationing off a certain amount to pay for food so that you can get more people on the ground, boots on the ground, maybe. Or when you're talking about directly giving us bullets and planes and helicopters and whatnot. Either way, all right, that's a military contribution. If you're going to give money to Hamas, you're going to give money to the Palestinian authorities. Who does that money fall to? Let's be honest. And how is that money going to get used? You're not giving humanitarian aid. You're aiding the war. This is where my major problem comes in politically. Funding both sides of a conflict. It is exactly what I saw, and I believe we talked about this with Andrew a while back now, on how I believe that both world wars started, but became what they really became, was by dumbass countries like ourselves, the United States, profiting off of what is happening around the world, which is what I do believe is the plan right now. Ukraine, Israel, whether it be money coming in the future, puppetry, whatever it may be. You never know. If this is how it's going to go down, what we're talking about is another, again, a world war. And this is where I get afraid. Now, I mentioned a lot today, Iran. Iran taking advantage of their proxies is a major concern for me because Iran, of course, has a good relationship with Russia. Then you start tying in the entirety of the world conflict, and we haven't even talked a lick, maybe one little quote about how much Ukraine was getting. Ukraine and Russia is still fighting to this day. So if you're going to talk about American aid, what we are focusing on, and, I'm sorry, but look outside your fucking window and see the problems that we have here in America. This is where I see the issues, right? This is where, again, I as an American, I cannot stand for it. And this is where I think you got to look at the diplomacy of both regimes, right? If you're looking at a Kamala regime coming in 2024 and you're looking at, does my vote matter? I think it does. Okay. Why? Couple of things. My opinion here, not a fact. I believe that places like Israel are taking advantage of the moment. They know that if they are to get a Donald Trump presidency, again, this is my opinion, a deal is going to be struck and war is going to. So if there is any, again, leaders that heads need to roll, now's the time. If there is any land that needs to be secured, now is the time. Because as soon, and this is my opinion again, but I believe that Israel sees it as such, that once Donald Trump comes in, there's going to be a deal made, hands down. And I can't tell if that's what's happening in Ukraine. I'm going to do a little bit more digging there because stuff and information seems to be not coming through accurately from either side. It's a lot of propaganda. It's worse than the Israel-Hamas war, in my opinion. So we'll dig into that, I think, in a future episode, probably before the election. So it'll be this week or next week. And we'll dive into that a little bit. But again, I think that that's one reason that I think a regime difference is huge. Because Kamala, let's be honest, Kamala, the Harris ticket is going to be following the Joe playbook. They don't have another playbook. If they're going to rule so wildly left, it's a 4-year president, 4 and done. So they have to rule. You have to understand the playbook. And also, to keep in mind, this war is already in progress. Seeing it as a profiting opportunity, which it absolutely is as arms dealers, that could be the road that they take. What we've seen with Trump has been an attempt at peace in the Middle East that has been shattered within the past year. Everything has gone to shit. Actually, I should say as soon as Joe Biden got in, because one of the first things that he did was Afghanistan, pull all that out in that debacle. And I think that really made the region unstable. You could look back at a real episode and get our opinions on that. But furthermore, talking about the different regimes, you saw them both in office, and whether Kamala can make the argument or not that she's different than Joe, I can almost guarantee you, I hope to not be right because I hope she's never president, but I can almost guarantee you if she is, you're going to see essentially what we have right now, which is slow playing it, to both sides, who are we going to profit off the most of? Basically playing both sides of a bet, which is insane. To me, is insane. Yeah. What you also have is the regional conflict that's being allowed here and nobody to put their foot on the floor. And again, I want you to look back on what the presidency with Trump was. Okay, you had deal making. Now again, making deals with terrorists, as people like to say, a lot of times can come back to bite you. And are you willing to allow them to make that mistake and cross you by making deals? That's the person that Trump is. And I believe if you can commit to that, and again, if you're going to play both sides, keep it at peace, then I think we have a profiting strategy, at least if you're talking about economically, which is something we could really desperately use here in America. If you're not going to go with peace and you're going to go with war, and we haven't seen Trump in war, what I would hope, and this is a huge difference, I would say, between the two, what I would hope is that it is full throttle, one side or the other, but we know which side that is. It's going to be Israel. I would hope it's full throttle. Get the job done. Finish off Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis. Finish off other ideological terror groups that are in the region that you so claim are all this issue. Give them everything they need to finish it and be done. Be at peace. Make a deal then. If that's the route, again, I would hope that Trump is better. I'm leaning towards casting my vote for the man, and I really wasn't a few months ago. Fortunately, I see so many issues with the Harris-Walz ticket, and this just being one of them. Their inability to confront the reality that is the Middle East, that is the problem, and being a stable force, if there is any, in the world. This is a major difference to me. I think one thing you have to look back on is basically the diplomacy that was attempted by the Biden-Harris administration. That is basically telling Israel, stop, don't go here. And they basically rolled all over him and they didn't do anything. Then if you're going to hold an ally accountable, hold them accountable. But again, the way that they're playing the both sides thing, if they're going to continue to do that, what I've heard is, and no verification here, so this is just hearsay. What I've heard is you have many leaks coming out of the Biden-Harris White House talking about military plans of Israel, leaking out plans anytime that there's plans being discussed. What is the right path for Israel in that case? If that's true, if all of your military plans get leaked, if there's some way they have a back channel communication to try to help them out and keep this war going, there's so many different sides. It's unfortunate to say, but to me, there's really no good side. The best solution in any situation of war is a quick end. End it as soon as possible. Come to the table. Find a way to make a deal. Until we see that, I think we're going to continue to see a devolution of hope. We're going to see more countries get involved without doubt. You're already seeing it again. Attacks into Lebanon, attacks into Yemen, different places in the Middle East getting involved. Iran, of course, using proxies. You start having multi-fronted war here. It's going to be pretty soon that, again, other countries are going to be involved aiding the different groups. There's going to be a regional conflict really spill into what could become a cross-Atlantic conflict, which is in turn really going to be a world conflict. It already is, obviously, with people aiding both sides from all over the place. It already is a world conflict. It's just whether we want to agree to it as such or not. But I think the bigger point here is, are more civilians going to be impacted? Is it going to spread? And I believe that, given the chance, I believe that Donald Trump will do that. You guys tell me what you think in the comments. I want you to tell me if you have a side in this conflict. Do you believe that we should fully back Israel? Do you believe that the Palestinian movement needs more light shed on it in the American public? Do you believe that the rights of the Palestinians are being trampled by Israel? And if that's the case, tell me what I'm missing, right? Tell me what I'm missing in the formation of Israel. Tell me what I'm missing in how Israel became so hated, in the sense that they started terrorism, in my opinion, in the area. Didn't start terrorism as a movement. They started it in the area. They got the media to jump on terroristic acts and using that as an opportunity to spread violence in other ways. You see that as more than enough to justify the constant barrage of missiles that come into Israel, whether you're to believe that or not. Is that justified? Because land was trampled generations ago and taken by people who are not born in the area. How would we feel about it if it happened to us Americans? And should we vote on that based on another region of the world that, in my opinion, really shouldn't be affecting us? You tell me in the comments. I want you to sound off. I've been blathering. This issue has been on my mind so much. Getting to a point where it's one of those things where the more and more you read into it, the stupider and stupider you feel, because you just can't make heads or tails of it. And then, to me, that's also the beauty in a conflict. And maybe it's not great to say that a conflict is beautiful, given the amount of carnage that has been displayed in the past year, but there's beauty in a symbol. Let me put it this way. We as people have many traits that follow us as animals and just human beings. Wars and conflict, at the end of the day, if not resolved by diplomacy, not resolved by words, at the end of the day, begets violence, and violence at a broad scale. If two groups of people can't come to terms at the negotiating table and can't make a disagreement disappear, it becomes. And to maybe beauty still isn't the right word, but it is fitting that a nation that was born into conflict really can't seem to get out of it. Again, I've been Sal Sante. Thank you for tuning in to We the Patriots. I love you all, and peace out.
I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.